It's a pleasure to have with us Fabrizio Barca. As probably all of you or most of you know, Fabrizio has been the Minister for Territorial Cohesion in Italy from 2011 to 2013 and President of the OECD Committee for Territorial Policies from 1999 to 2006. He is an economist, and by training, actually, he is a statistician. And right now, well, he has been working for a long time at the Bank of Italy, and right now he's the coordinator of the Forum for Diversity and Inequalities, Forum Disuguaglianze e Diversità. Before I actually leave the floor to Fabrizio, can I ask all of you that are connected to actually silence your microphones, please, so that we don't have any background noise disturbing Fabrizio while he's talking? If you don't do it now, I will do it in a second because I think I have the power to do so. Right, and also we are right now live and recording. So if you are connected to our Zoom webinar, we are assuming that you are okay with being recorded. Otherwise, if you're not, you can leave the webinar and watch the live streaming on our YouTube channel. And even if you do so, you will be able to ask questions at the end of Fabrizio's talk, because Alessandro Crociata will collect questions and actually provide us in this chat with the question that you want to ask. Right? So, and Fabrizio, you have about 50 minutes, 1 hour or so. And then after your presentation, we will start, hopefully, a very lively debate. And thank you very much. We all know you have a very busy schedule, so we are very grateful that you are with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alessandra, and thank you, everybody, being connected. It's a great pleasure to be here with you and my beloved Gran Sasso Science Institute, discussing about strategies to fight inequalities and to enhance social justice after the COVID-19. I'll immediately go to some facts. I will not have slides, but I do start with some facts that many of you know, but many others maybe don't. You should be able to see now. You notice what is this? This is the share of income of the top 1% of several countries. You can see the break. It was falling down until the end of the 70s, and it jumps up at the end of the 70s, beginnings of the 80s, independently of what countries we are talking about. The same is true for income inequality as measured by the very well-known Gini coefficient. You can see the break in the series coming at different times with different jumps, but it comes more or less at the beginning of the 80s. This is represents the increase, the integer of the increase in the growth of actually annual growth rate between 91 and 2016, according to where you are in the income distribution. You can clearly see not the elephant of our friend, but you can see there is a very clear increase at the top and decrease at the bottom, and stability at the center. This is about the others were different countries. This is Italy. This is Italy again, and this is wealth. As you know, wealth inequality has worsened more than others. You can see here the red is the top 1 out of 10,000 people, 0.01%. It was about 2% for many years. It's jumped to the 7%. It actually crossed the share of the bottom 50%. So now the top 0.01% has got twice as much as the bottom 50% in terms of distribution of wealth. The gray, I attract your attention to gray. This is the children living in a low-income families, in a poor family. It's sort of stable in the north and the south, a very high level in the south, 40% of the children. But what is remarkable is the increase from 30 to more than 50% of children of families who were actually not born in Italy. And this is already suggests something about which I will talk in a second. This is the amount of wealth that is being inherited as a share of national income. This is the UK series. It grows and grows. And at the same time, the tax on inheritance is stable, if not falling. It's very similar. This is the US situation. Germany is not as bad. We know that policy in Germany has been accommodating more the changes. And then finally, the classical intergenerational wealth mobility. You can see here the people according to whether they had poor parents at the left or wealthy parents at the right. People with poor parents have 32% to stay in that category, while the chance for for kids born in a wealthy parents to fall into the unwealthy or poorer share of the wealth is only 12%, 12 out of 100. These are sort of stuff that I get out of it now. I get out of it now, if I can. Yes, you can see me now. This is kind of stuff that we know, but the story doesn't stop here. It is very important to make clear that it doesn't stop here. It is not just about income or wealth inequality. The picture of the pre-COVID situation, September, October of last year, was a situation of lack of saving. 10% of the Italian population, for example, does not have the saving enough to survive without income or transfers for more than 2 or 3 weeks. A very high share of precarious jobs. We suddenly discovered it during COVID. 6.5 million out of 21 million people in the private sector in Italy have either no contract at all, i.e. they are irregular labor, or they have a very short-term contract, and that suddenly it was discovered that they were not covered by any kind of insurance. SMEs, small firms, 1/3, according to some, 25% according to others, of firms, this is again are Italian numbers, are in a very bad situation by which their productivity is so low that they can actually survive on the market only by paying very low wages. And finally, as Andres Rodriguez Pose is attracting our attention to all the time, territorial inequalities that again stopped falling at the end of the 70s and now have risen again, and have presenting themselves with a very strong contrast, not just between rural and urban areas, but between urban areas, between centers and peripheries, and between inner areas, i.e. areas very far away from services and not. But it's not just a matter of economic inequalities. If we have, as I introduce here, because when we talk about social justice, we should be very precise. If we define social justice with Amartya Sen as the very following clear expression: a person capability to do things he or she has reason to value, without reducing the capability of the next generations. If we define a person in a condition of social justice as it is, then we have other kinds of injustice. We have the inequality in the access to services, to mobility, to education, to health, as we again discovered very abruptly during the COVID crisis. And then we have the whole unpreparedness to tackle pandemic or to tackle natural disasters. And finally, very important, recognition inequalities. This is a very German-like concept. It's the feeling or the condition not to be recognized for your own value, for all your own contribution. Amartya Sen would say, for your own agency by society as a whole. There are masses of labor in many sectors that we suddenly realized they existed, invisible labor that suddenly, or people in rural areas that sort of fell out of the radar, as again Andres Rodriguez Pose say. Well, all these inequalities could well be worsened, are being worsened by the crisis. We do know that by previous crises, by previous pandemics, SARS, Ebola, Zika, they have been analyzed and studied, and they show a very negative impact on inequalities due to less healthy conditions of vulnerable people and less chances to react. But there is more and more negative to that. The analysis and studies of the effects of natural disasters, particularly Katrina, show that wealth inequality was repeatedly increased also by the policy. The policies was aimed not at the wealthy, but the middle class. The most vulnerable people were deprived from any mean to react. So the policy was biased, and it has actively increased inequalities. But there is more reason for concern after the with the COVID crisis full in action around us. I mentioned two more points. The acceleration of digital transformation. I come back to that. There is not only bad things in it, but it could lead to an acceleration of wealth concentration. Actually, this is what is happening now at this very moment while we are speaking, through the very use that we are doing of this beautiful platform, not this particular one that came about more recently, but many others who are making the most of their control on a digital platform. And also, the acceleration of digital transformation is increasing the chances of infringing on our private life and on our capability to protest, to gather, to debate, to have what Amartya Sen calls a heated debate. And finally, in terms of risks, further accentuating existing inequalities, is the fact that the pandemic and its consequences are being exploited at this very moment by authoritarian plutocrats, at the moment actually particularly in Anglo-Saxon countries, to tighten their grip and threaten democracy. I don't need to elaborate on that. Faced with this picture, millions of people around the world feel that a U-turn in policy and politics is possible and is needed. It is needed to reverse this trend, and in a sense, many of us dare to think that we could turn some of the changes triggered by the COVID-19 into an opportunity. I'll come back to that. You can perceive this rising awareness. Let me quote a rather stunning woman that is using different words and is showing what women can do when they're given the power. And that's the president of the European Commission, that has used a language that we had not used to read anymore in political statements, a strong language of her rather amazing State of the Union that made many of us, certainly myself, feeling very proud to be European. And I sort of felt again European. Tony Atkinson, who claimed that we should all have double nationality, European and national, would have been pleased. But for the U-turn that many of us feel that you can sense in the President of the Commission words to take place, we need three ingredients. And that's my punchline of the day, on which I will elaborate. A, we need a conceptual framework. We need a conceptual framework explaining the origin of that inequality U-turn that we have seen on the charts. What happened at the end of the 70s? Was it unavoidable? Was it avoidable? Second, we need values. We need sentiments. We need sanctity, as the moral psychologists used to say, that contrast the existing sentiments to make people feeling impotent and participate and push for and mobilize for such a U-turn. And finally, as always, we're technical people. Many of you are technical people. We also do need operational proposals that are technically well framed and designed that can actually implement. But any of these three things without the others leads us nowhere. Okay, these are the conditions for what we expect to happen. And when I close my eyes and I summarize all of them together, I think about US, for example, not because it's the only country that I care, but because I know about that country more. So the examples is deep in my knowledge and sentiments. And I think about the US of the early beginning of previous century, more or less about the same time today, 100 years ago, when sentiments, operational proposals, and conceptual framework came about to redesign what was a plutocracy into a democracy through the New Deal. And it was harsh, huh? There were conflicts, very harsh. We can maybe in some questioning discuss that. It would be interesting. History can teach us a lot. Now, the Forum on Inequality and Diversity, of which I'm a coordinator, what is it for many of you? I mean, you can see more about it in the chat. I put a link. The Forum is a strange alliance, but many of these alliances are coming up in many countries. It's an alliance between 8 civic organizations, very different in culture, and 100 professionals, experts, mostly academics, that are coming together to try to work and produce conceptual framework, the right sentiments, and very technical and operational proposals. So let's come to what we have. What I'm telling you is what comes from that. It's in a book published in Italy called Un futuro più giusto, for a better future, but it's also in an English paper that I put on the chat. So let's start with conceptual framework. I'd say very little about sentiments, and I then make some examples about the proposals. That's the way I plan to spend my remaining time. The conceptual framework, that's a delicate point. We claim with Tony Atkinson and with many others, but Tony has provided us with very punchy arguments in his last book, that none of the inequalities I presented or introduced you to, or that you know by yourselves about, are unavoidable. Sure enough, there were 3 phenomena that have certainly contributed and have certainly challenged the so-called social democratic order of the post-war. Globalization by rising labor supply, that amazing, beautiful phenomena of 600, 500 million people coming out in Indonesia, in India, in China from poverty, and suddenly being on the labor market and certainly pushing wages down, creating problem for the so-called labor aristocracy, as used to be called in the last century in the West. Second challenge, the digital transformation that has in itself the capacity, we'll talk about it later, the capacity to allow for or to favor even a concentration of knowledge and then of power and then of wealth. And finally, the fragmentation of labor, offshoring, of course, but also more in general, the lessening of the role of mass production that has characterized the Fordism, whereby labor had more chances to come together, to strike, to know each other, to create coalitions, to adhere to union, and to then go into that competition with capital, which is characteristic of capitalism. I would say is one of the soul and the strength of capitalism. Is the conflict between labor and capital is not a menace for capitalism, is the way why it still survived. Now, these are 3 challenges. They certainly challenge labor and labor union. First of all, they challenge parties. Fragmenting labor means that it is obviously more difficult for parties to represent them. Think about what our political analysts told us. I mean, it was easier to represent labor both for social Christian parties and for socialist parties around the West. But what I claim, what Tony claims, what many of us claim, is that the reaction of intermediate organizations and of parties, most of all of parties, was not to take the challenge and react to it, but it was to accommodate the challenge and actually amplify its effects. So most of what happened later, and I make 5 examples, was due not so much to the challenge, but to the winning of ideas. As John Maynard Keynes used to say, ideas, culture have an hegemony, cultural can have an hegemony, and a new thinking that had been developed in the previous 70 years, 60 years, that had been defeated by Keynes and by social democracy, suddenly seemed to be useful and came to the fore, was neoliberalism, and actually got the hegemony. Whether you were a left-wing parties or a right-wing parties, you believed in the things I'm about to tell you. You start believing that market and merit are the ultimate values of our society. Market is the place where values get expressed, and merit is expressed on the market. Class subalternity, or in more simple expression, the fact that labor is systematically weaker than people having control on capital. When I mean capital, I don't mean only machineries, I mean also immaterial capital. This trivial fact that my friend Gigi Zingales from Chicago knows very well and talks about. So it's trivial that labor is less powerful for the very simple reason that labor can only stop working, i.e. it's not a slave, we're not slaves, but it cannot bring with itself the capital, while the people controlling the capital can deprive the other people from the capital. Oliver Hart got a Nobel Prize showing how this leads to an unequal distribution. Now that disappeared from the screen, so it seemed that actually unions were not necessary anymore, were just corporations. Inequality was more and more conceived as a necessary cost, a temporary necessary cost to be paid to allow for growth. It would eventually percolate to all the places and to all the people. The state, the state, according to neoliberalism, plays a very important role. Not true that it doesn't, and there is lots of spending in neoliberal thinking, but the state has the power and the role to enact in a one-size-fits-all way, I'll come back to it, the standards and the best practices that are set by technocrats, mostly within corporations, obscuring the very idea that something like a political choice is embodied, hidden within what it looks like a technical decision. And finally, in this picture, what is citizens' role? That's very clear. Albert Hirschman had made it to us that we can have either voice or exit. Now with neoliberalism, voice disappears. People can only exit. They can exit by voting one day, acclaiming through vote somebody, acclaiming, like Schmidt, the very scientist that then adhered to the Nazi party later when Nazism came about in Germany. You can exit from service. You don't like a place, you go away. You don't like the hospital, you get another one. You don't like the school, you move to another area. But you don't have a voice. There is no public debate. But public debate happens to be the soul of democracy. So the idea democracy was pushed out of the picture systematically. I do not elaborate on that because I want to move on. I want to move to the consequences of this thinking, of this deep thinking that is within a bit each of us. This, as Antonio Gramsci always pointed out, is the strength of common sense. Our common sense, everybody's common sense changed. It's the strength of ideas. So policy action followed these beliefs. I'll make you five examples. One very important one, we are in 1994. The world is writing very important agreements to increase freedom in trade, a very important step, which actually helped China and Indonesia and India to come out of the condition. But another decision was taken at the same very time. That was the TRIPS agreement on property rights, on intellectual property rights, and that decision strengthened. There are two principles running property rights. One is the principle that if you do not protect them enough, then you do not have, if you're a private concern, not you at University or JSSI, you don't do it to earn money, you do it to have fame or to contribute to society. But if you're a private concern, it's quite right. You want to have an incentive because you fail 90 times out of 100, so that time you succeed, you want a good return. Fine. But then has to be balanced with the idea that intellectual innovation and knowledge is the most important common good that in the world exists. And we need to balance these two principles, and they were unbalanced in 94 in favor of intellectual property rights, with enormous consequences on stopping the transfer of knowledge to SMEs. No surprise that countries like Germany and Italy that rely on diffuse entrepreneurship and diffuse knowledge had a very bad effect that Germany managed to counteract and we didn't. Point number two, the digital platform. As a consequence of that beliefs, the state retreated from the very idea that internet should be maybe something, and that platform, digital platform, maybe should be regulated and maybe should be owned. So we let the corporations controlling the digital platforms. We just close our eyes about the consequence, enormous consequence that had, and how difficult it is to come back from it, and how that allow them to get free information from us, unpaid information from us, as my liberal friends always notice. They should pay us for that. Even according to capitalism and market-oriented capitalism, but that no, we are not paid for the information we give. We get something in return in terms of services, the very service we are using now, but this service is nothing in comparison of what is taken out of us. Third, minimizing through regulation, through practice, the role of non-shareholders and non-managers, i.e. other stakeholders, citizens, and labor, first of all, within the governance of firms. My true study in my life is corporate governance, and I'm ready to answer and to be more specific if some of you want to know about it, something about it. But what happened, as you know, just read the Financial Times, not what Fabrizio Barca says, which admits that one of the troubles of current society and concentration of wealth is the fact that we created the myth of maximization of shareholder value. But that's not capitalism. Capitalism, after the war, the main goal of a capitalist was certainly to make profits, quite rightly, but to make profits and contribute to society. A capitalist would know that it wouldn't survive long if it wasn't able to prove that it was giving a major contribution to society. Now, and during the last 30 years, the accumulation of wealth, whatever it takes, however accumulated, became a value in itself. And that was encouraged by laws, the laws on labor market, that at the time when the union should have been helped to grow, to become more technically competent, to deal with technologies, to be able to provide labor with assistance and help in negotiating new conditions and new strategies in steer the technological process within each firm in the right direction of social justice. Union were demolished. And this is, you can read it now today, a bit late for them to realize that, on the IMF working papers. I might want to notice something, that the first time IMF said that union demolition, union weakening was one of the part of the problems a few days after his president, who certainly probably had been misbehaving for a long time, and somebody probably had information about his misbehavior, was suddenly brought to the fore on the press. And in a few days, he had quite rightly to leave. But why was he attacked? 5 days after that working paper was produced in the IMF saying that union weakening had been the problem. And then finally, in terms of policy effects of those beliefs, is pushing welfare back in education, in health, in social care. It was some countries resisted. Germany did resist. UK didn't. Italy did not. In US, actually, there was some improvement in that direction thanks to the amazing years of Obama. But many of the countries in Europe that had achieved quite high results, the welfare was under pressure. And what does it mean? What is under pressure? It means that the caring of people is moved away from the collective, from the care of the collective interaction between state and social organization and civic society, back onto the family. So the families were being burdened more and more with the education of the kids, with the taking care of the Alzheimer or the elderly people, with whatever troubles there were. You know, welfare has not been killed, but family have been burdened with this very strong weight, and families cannot cope with it, particularly when there are vulnerable families, and we do see that in the behavior of many young people. Even tremendous stories that have characterized Italy in the last 20 days. We cannot blame them on their families, even if their families' reaction looks weird and even unlawful. Now, It was not only a matter of policy. Tony Atkinson recuperates Antonio Gramsci and say, hey, these policy changes that would have not happened if we had not produced or absorbed a change in common sense. I make examples. I cannot elaborate too much. Poverty, the word poverty. When you saw a poor person after the war, your mind, my mind, any of you mind, immediately thought had a picture as when you say a person, you see, images. You see the image of his condition, the place where he was born, the family. He must have had bad chances in life. Now, the first thing you think about is what hasn't he or she done that to fall into this situation. And this attitude to the stigmatization of poverty is transferred into the reaction that we see every day at the moment in Italy, in other countries, to whatever welfare intervention you do in favor of poverty. They are cheating. Of course, there's always somebody cheating. 5% of the people, as my friend Elena Granaglia points out. Are we then abolishing it because 5% of the people are cheating, or we are concentrating on the 95% that deserve it? And even the word merit, I've already said it, changed mind. And a last expression that gained ground in our mind, and that's very relevant for the second part of my presentation, when I'll be moving to examples of operational proposals, is there is no alternative. The famous phrase, there is no alternative. Hey guys, I mean, that's capitalism. As if there are no many capitalisms, plural. As if capitalism itself hasn't gone through many phases. As if capitalism, strength, does not lie as it does exactly in its amazing flexibility. If it is not pushed by a democracy, it will exploit people to their very skin and bones. But if it is pushed, the willingness to make profit, to emerge, to contribute to society, to excel, will make people exploiting themselves, as good old bearded Karl Marx used to say. The first person exploited by a capitalist, a good capitalist, the capitalist itself, who sort of spends 14 hours, 16 hours of its day actually inventing new things to be able to cope with very difficult competition. So these are, whatever I said until now is good news. If you do not object, as you might, to what I've argued now, this is good news. This is saying that we can do something about it. If it was unavoidable, as they try to convince us, and as if some of us have convinced ourselves of, then there is nothing to be done. But if there is, then it means that the U-turn is possible in policy and in common sense, and we can work on it. It will be difficult because of our current common sense, and because that situation of exploitation, of inequality, has produced an effect in the meantime that I haven't mentioned, which is what Karen Sennett, an amazing American moral psychologist, in 2005, in an amazing book called Authoritarian Dynamic, i.e., if you believe, if you are a vulnerable person, if you're a poor person, if you are an unrecognized person, if you are a person, as Andres says, living in an abandoned territory, and if you are told to believe and you've ended up to believe that there is no alternative, then there is only hate and resentment left to you, and you will hate what? The powerful? No, you will hate the people even poorer than you, because you want to hate somebody that you can actually bash down. And so you fall into the hands of the authoritarian people. And finally, changing it's difficult because it has many adversaries or enemies, if you want a stronger word. We should rediscover the word enemies. Yes, there are many people who are profiting from a current situation. They're not entrepreneurs or labor or young people or women. They are sort of a bit of all. There are many people that benefit, rentier, gaining from the current situation. They will do what they can to avoid any change. But before I get into the proposal, the last good news. COVID-19 has, as I mentioned before, created risks, but is also offering us some opportunities. I'll mention 3 of them. First of all, I skippily referred to it before. We, many of us, who have sort of forgotten about invisible workers in logistic, invisible in the gig economy, invisible behind the screen. You know fairly well that behind this kind of clean digital economy, there are many people who spend their time categorizing pictures when we haven't given a label to them. So all these invisible words came to the fore, and we realized they exist because they were essential for our survival. And this is a chance. It doesn't make a change in itself. It's a chance. Second chance, just close all of our eyes and think about the days of lockdown. However we lived, or for people in countries who didn't have a lockdown, the equivalent, who were not lucky enough to be told to be in a lockdown, think about how they live through, or maybe they are living now, because some countries are in a worse situation now than they were 3 months ago. You feel a change in preferences. This reference, Alessandra, is to an economist of the 50s, Lancaster, that always say that capitalism, and in analyzing capitalism, we should analyze the changes in preferences. Now we know some of these changes in preferences are induced by marketing and by advertising, but some are happen to within ourselves. Now there has been a change in preferences towards essential services, toward what really matters, caring of other people, caring of ourselves, social services, health, in conditions of emergency, locally produced food, safer, at hand, when we were worried there could be shortages, even 0-kilometer energy. Oh, I wish I had decided to have an energy production in our collective housing as it is possible today. I would be less worried that they might cut it at any time. And a sort of, and that's relevant for people like Alessandra and some of us that work very much on rural and urban areas, a feeling from urban people that how beautiful it would be for me to go back, not to faraway countries by jumping on a very high footprint airplane, but actually to enjoy the rural areas, dispersing myself, being able to walk with my friends in an area where there is no high density. So a chance for some abandoned areas. Many of these feelings, and think about capitalism. At the moment, in any of our countries, there are millions of workers and millions of entrepreneurs that have been hit very badly by the crisis. Okay, now we don't see it all because of the because of the social subsidies, but they will emerge. They are emerging. Some of them already emerged, and these people are redesigning their plan of life. But in capitalism, that means also redesigning their entrepreneurship, their enterprises, and they are noticing our changing preferences. If you're a good entrepreneur, even a social entrepreneur, you need to look around, to smell the air, and to say what is being asked, what is the demand. And so we do see now, these days, this second, while we're talking, this kind of supply and demand alertness to a change. And finally, I mentioned before digital transformation as being a concern, the acceleration of digital transformation through COVID being a source of concern, but is also a source of opportunities. Working at a distance, not smart working. I don't like smart ever because it covers up. It could be bad, it could be good. But working at a distance, so there is no judgment in it, could certainly cause problems by fragmenting labor or creating an overlapping of your life at home and of your working life, particularly worrying for women, considering the particular situation in our society, particularly in the Italian society, where the patriarchal values are still more stronger than in other countries. But it could also offer an opportunity if properly used. It reduces the number of people that have to transfer every day, spend their hours, it reduces mobility, and it could offer, if we could offer them another place to stay near the home, maybe in a working area, in a common working area, it could offer opportunities. And finally, an area that I want to mention, education, culture, entertainment. This is an area, and our conversation at this moment proves it. I seem to refer as a negative thing to be on a platform, but it could be a fantastic thing if we learn how to use it. We could improve even art and culture, even theater. I got friends in cultural sector that are trying to say, how can I exploit, that are designing plays on WhatsApp, you believe it or not. So coming out of standardization increases the chances of people with little amount of money to come together, young people, and actually offer culture. It can happen under some conditions, i.e., the most important word for the forum is bifurcation. We are at the moment in a very strong, we have always been in bifurcations. I argued before we had bifurcation even at the beginning of the 80s. I say there was a shock, globalization, technological change, and the fragmentation of labor, and open up bifurcation. We took the wrong road. Now, with this shock, we are presented again with a bifurcation. The past tells us we did not face up to this bifurcation due to a shock in a proper way. But we could, if we do the right thing. And here is where our collective action can make a difference and come into the game. When I say collective action, I mean action by the state sector, of course, but also us as a collective organization. Remember that I'm speaking as a Fabrizio Barca in my history, but at the moment I'm speaking as a person that is delivering to you knowledge that comes from not only academics, but also civic organization. Let me sum up. I do have 50 less 40. I got about 10, 12 minutes. Let me summarize. We do have our proposals. They're on the web. They're on the book. I'll summarize them under two slogans. Simple one: access to knowledge and redistribution of power. Both these lines of action comprise different overlapping, technically well-developed proposals about which I'm ready to be submitted to your questions that address the issue of pre-distribution of wealth and knowledge and creation of wealth and knowledge. They are not addressing, except a couple of them, redistribution once wealth is already produced, but they address the issue of pre-distribution. You cannot address the issue of inequalities only by addressing it once inequality has come about. It's too tough for a job on redistribution, and it does produce distortions in our society. I'm ready to tackle this issue. And so I'll mention some proposals under the two headings. Access to knowledge. Let me start, the most important one, I'll deliver to you one. We live in Europe under a paradox. We are an amazing set, 1,000, out of which actually Gran Sasso, the Gran Sasso laboratories are one of them. We live in Europe in a context where there are 1,000 state-owned, public, call them you want, research centers paid by our money, by taxpayers' money, run managerially in a very complex way, with a mix of very complex financing coming from the states, different groups of states. What is the paradox? That they produce open science that can be accessed by any of us in green energy, health and aging, digital transfers, you name it. What is the paradox? That only some of us, actually only large corporations that have already themselves made major investments in the research are capable to use that open science in order to then turn it into innovative services and innovative commodities that they then sell exclusively as oligopolies or monopolies at a monopoly power. And as my friend and economist Massimo Frodo says, we pay for them twice, if not three times. Once as taxpayers, a second time we pay the price, a monopoly price, and third, we also contribute freely to some of those products through the very discussion we are having now, i.e. our use of the web. How you get out of it? You do not get out of it through regulation. Regulation is very important. There are three very important points in the President of the Commission on digital economy, but that's not enough. We need to balance the power of the large private corporations on the very ground where they operate, which is amazing, the market. This is what capitalism and democracy together have always done in the history of capitalism and democracy. You need to create a hub a publicly owned, open to private financing, a publicly owned hub that does not only do research, but also develops it into innovation. A year and a half ago, when we came out with these proposals, some were looking at us thinking, oh yeah, sure, okay, the time is over for that. Now we read it in the President of the Commission proposal, when she does propose exactly that in the area of health. Why does she do it? Because it's a scandal to read in the OMS report that we are tackling this pandemic with the same tools we had in the 60s and 70s in terms of development of vaccines, that we have not spent any time on the previous alert of SARS and others that could have led us to have in 2 or 3 or 4 months what we now will have ended up having in a year and a half or 2, if you're lucky. And that was because it was not convenient for large corporations. It is not convenient for large corporations. There is no regulation that can convince them to throw away their money. So it has to be done by a corporation that has a strategy and a different purpose. This is what we propose. And I got a telephone call from a couple of people in Brussels when she came out of it with September 16. It would be a memorable date for me. And she said, did she read your report? And I said, I don't think so. I think ideas sometimes have their own legs. It's time for that to be done. But there is not only that in terms of knowledge, but there is also an issue. Knowledge is not only concentrated in high competence centers, but there's also dispersed in territories. This is where the kind of jobs that many of you do, that I've done in my life, that Alessandra does, which is place-based approach, come into the game. How do you design today? How do we design mobility, health, and education until yesterday? How do we design public services? In a one-size-fits-all way, decided in a little room somewhere in the state. We can't do that anymore. We need to do what Chuck Sable called experimental democracy, experimentalism. We need to activate processes by which, at national level, you set the goals, the guidelines of what Mariana Mazzucato called the strategic missions, fine, but not in details. They have to be open-ended rules, guidelines, and rules of the game. I'm using a very rigorous expression, a juridical expression, a law expression by saying open-ended, meaning open-ended that can be filled up by knowledge and content, place by place, according to what? According to a strategic mobilization of people that are given a chance by the municipal authorities to actually come together and what? Consent to a decision already made. That's not participation. But to produce knowledge, to discuss, to do what Amartya Sen called a heated, open, informed, and not rational. I use another expression that it doesn't come to my mind. Which is sort of more than rational way. Okay, sorry for that slip of mine. And it is through these public debate at local level that social justice and environmental justice come together. You might say, hey, Barca, but you are not mentioning environment at all. Why, I have. I mentioned it when I define social justice as the capability to express what you are and to let the new generation having the same chance or more to express it. That means that environmental justice is within social justice, is the same as it was actually, by the way, in the Black people movement in the 60s in the US. So this is about knowledge. Let me finish on the last point, which is the second guideline: rebalancing power. Rebalancing power to whom? Rebalancing power to labor, to youth, and to women. Let me just immediately say that we have done something on rebalancing people to women, not enough. I have a couple of points that I might share with you if you ask questions, but we are at the moment sort of with the help of an amazing bunch of people that have joined the Forum on Inequality and Diversity, we are sort of re-going through a gender perspective onto our strategy because it wasn't strong enough on these very relevant issues. So I'll mention only the other 2 points. Rebalancing power to labor. There we are very, very, very down to the ground. We said what, again, the president of the commission said a few days ago, a minimum wage, but a minimum wage with inspections. I will not elaborate on that. But we need there has to be something more. I said before that one of the troubles that we are in depend on the fact that labor and citizens were not given a chance as stakeholders to have enough weight on strategic decisions of firms. So let's give them a weight. And we think that the Dutch model, properly elaborated, is the best way. So we put on the ground a very elaborated proposal called Labor and Citizen Councils, by which to get near on the side of the board of directors, you create a body where all the labor has its representatives, not only the labor of the firm, but also the precarious labor of the integrated filière. And the citizens also elect them. And what do? Well, they discuss the effect on labor and the effects on environment and consumption of decisions of the firm, and have differentiated powers that they can answer you about if you want to know. And finally, I end up on youth. That's particularly relevant all over the world, but is very relevant in Italy, that is going through a tremendous youth crisis, as we call it, that explodes, that manifests itself in the fall, in the postponement of the decision whether to have or not to have children. There is nothing bad about not having children. There is bad the fact that you might want children when it's too late for you to have them, and it's very difficult even to adopt some. So the issue is a crisis that needs to be tackled. So we have 3 tools to address 0-14, 14, 28, 28, and more. 0-14 is very clear: education. We have a dramatic all over the world, but in Italy, all over the Western world, but in Italy, it's particularly serious education poverty, which is not just about competence, it's also about competence in mathematics, in reading, in speaking, but it's also about socializing, being able to understand what your rights and duties are, understanding history to be able to kind of make sense of yourself in society. And that needs to be tackled, and we obviously have some ideas on how should it be done. Then 1424, then we have a very tough, very provocative proposal that comes straight from Tony Atkinson, which is a universal inheritance. We believe that 2 girls at the age of 18 that have exactly the same education, but live in 2 very different families. So in a sense, school made up for the gap in the places where they were born, in their family social status. But now wealth come into the game. They have amazing chances. They might have chances whether they go to a post non-university, but post-education, non-university post-education. If they can choose a very good university where they carry on, or even to start up a company. Well, one of the 2 can do any of these things. It needs to go to work the day after, not using the wealth of knowledge has acquired and then losing it, and the other can. So we think, to be short, that needs to be compensated by redistributing wealth at the moment where there is inheritance. Every person achieving about 600,000 in Italy at the moment, achieve the age of 18, should inherit 15,000 euros universally, unconditional. I'm ready to then answer why unconditional, and assisted, i.e. accompanied by, from the age of 14 onwards, by a debate on how to use it to make up for different capacities of kids to be able to understand what they really want to do with that amount of money. Where does the money come from? It's about 8 billion euros a year. It comes from redesigning the current donation and bequest system of taxation by abolishing, you notice well, abolishing any tax up to the level of when you inherit or are donated less than 500,000 euros, quite a lot, untaxed, but above it, very progressive. And finally, labor. We do have some ideas on labor. I already mentioned the minimum wage. But we also believe that giving power, transferring power to you young people, it means giving them more power within the public administration. This is true everywhere. That's where you count. That's where you make a difference. And Italy has a particular chance because it is going through a renewal, a generational renewal. But taking young people on board is not enough. It's important how you take it, how you select them, how you take care of their organizational capacities, how you introduce them into the organization, and how much power you're ready to give to them, avoiding them falling, in a sense, being predated, being captured by the least interesting people within each public administration. These are our very simple proposals, and as one does in this context, but I don't seem to be doing it because I've lost it, but maybe I have it. The best thing to do it is summarizing in an expression that I don't have, so I don't want to prolong it anymore. But the long and the short of it is just to remember that I've gone through a conceptual framework that I'm ready to be challenged on, interpreting the current inequalities, the role of sentiments and common sense, and finally the technical proposals, of which I gave you only a taste. Sorry. Thanks very much for your attention, and sorry if I exceeded a bit my time.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much, Fabrizio. You were perfectly on time. Don't worry about that. And we still have plenty of time for discussion and debate. So I'm gonna ask if there are any questions. Most of you that are within the GSSI can already talk because you are in the panelists. But if you wanna ask a question and you are in the list of attendees, if you just write, I have a question in the chat, I can actually make you a panelist and you can actually talk if there is any question. Otherwise, I can start. Like it's always kind of, okay, Ugo has a question. Ugo, go ahead.
Yes.
Maybe introduce yourself, Ugo.
Yeah.
So that...
I'm a colleague of Alessandra here at the GSSI. I'm a human geographer, a critical human geographer. Thanks for your talk. It was really interesting and stimulating. I have a couple of questions. The first is, if you think there is now a crisis of neoliberal orthodoxy, for instance, the fact that European Union countries like Germany have not this dogma of balanced budget anymore. Is it a temporary thing, or it's how we can stabilize this new sensibility? I would say within the European Union. This is the first question. The second question, over the years, I've really appreciated your work on your approach, your theorization of place-based approach to regional development. So how we can use this idea of place-based development, regional development, local development, to pursue a greater social justice and a post-neoliberal agenda. Particularly, I'm interested in what is the role of local governments from this point of view, especially of municipalities. We have seen that during the pandemic, there have been a lot of complaints about the regional governance of the healthcare system. Can we shift in terms of governance from a centrality of in Italy, of regional government to that of local governments, of municipalities, as a way of pursuing this idea of place-based approach to regional development? Thanks.
What are the rules of the game? Shall I move on with these two?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead and then
Great.
we collect more questions.
Fantastic. Okay. Yes, it is shaken. The neoliberal paradigm is being shaken by the current situation, but we are in the middle of it. Being shaken doesn't mean that it's losing the grip. It is being shaken not only in terms of not sort of putting stability and the budget as a dogma, but it is being shaken in many other ways and moving into the
Fabrizio, you muted your microphone.
Okay.
Now it's fine. Yeah.
Okay. I was saying, sorry, that it is being shaken, not only in the sense that it is in its fixation and totemization of the stability, but also in understanding many of the things that we've been that I've been describing now, that are quite clear exactly from the. I really recommend all of you to read, if you haven't done it, the speech of the president of the commission. It's a new language. You can see that is being shaken, but there are very strong areas of resistance linked to culture and interests within the European Commission itself. I've been working for a long time for the European Commission, and I do see sort of the details, and I read also the papers that came out the day after, designing the implementation of the recovery and resilience facility. And you can see some of the ideas, the political ideas that are embodied, and some of the resistance that are coming out of what? They're coming out of the DG ECFIN, i.e. the area where the neoliberal thinking was more encrusted and trusted. And you can see within the technical documents move ahead and move back. But there is also another area of resistance. These are the parties. The progressive parties. The progressive parties are not yet in tune. Why? For a very simple reason. They're made up of human beings. They have been selected for 30 years in a different way, and they have a different culture. And even if they do understand that they may be for their own interest of being reelected, sorry to be so sort of nitty-gritty, even if they do understand that in order to be reelected they should change the music, then they can't do it. They don't feel it. They can't express it. So there is resistance, and so it's open. It's up to us. It's truly up to us, individually, in academics, in universities, in civic organization. Coming to the chance for a place-based approach to actually sort of be unleashed. You know the story, many of the people that are listening, place-based approach, the idea, I repeat, place-based approach is not localism, is not entrusting municipalities with the power to decide what to do, fragmenting a nation. That's not what it is. It is having very strong guidelines and national missions, and then entrusting the local authorities, as correctly Ugo Rossi said, the municipalities that are closer to the people with the power to implement. Okay, fine. And you can see that is not strong, even in the President of the Commission wording. It's there, but it's there with difficulty. So you have in the technical papers that I recommend you to read, for those of you who do regional policy, they're teaching us something. They do recognize that the main goal of the recovery and resilience facility is cohesion, territorial and social and economic cohesion, territorial cohesion, and then that seems sort of evaporates through the paper, through the technical paper. So as far as Europe is concerned, it's a battle. As far as Italy is concerned, I do see the room for that, because Italy has a chance that Austria has, that partly Germany has, that Turkey has. Let me mention Turkey, even if it is outside Europe, i.e. to have strong municipalities, unlike France, for example. So we are well positioned to implement more than others, and our best leading class, our best new people, young people coming out as mayors and members of the administration. So we do have a chance. And we do have a chance not to rewrite the constitutions, which certainly was written with a problem. You mentioned, would we be able to move some of the power from the regions to the local authorities? I think, yes, we should, but not by rewriting a constitution. Let's stop rewriting a constitution every couple of years. Certainly that constitution was written with mistakes, because there was a big transfer of power from the state to the regions, i.e. we created a confederation, okay, creating conflicts between regions and state, but the regions are the regional power, except for Valle d'Aosta, Alto Adige, and a few others, is as far away from the local people and from the territories, from the places, as Rome is, sometimes even more. So without changing the constitution, we can make a change, and the European money, the European rules of the game, and the Recovery and Resilience Facility is a fantastic opportunity to do so. And if I can both listen and speak, I can put a paper from the Forum on Inequality and Diversity suggesting to the government how should move ahead in order to make the place-based approach the main methodology for implementing the resilience and recovery facility.
Thank you.
Now we have. Oh, sorry, Ugo. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, it was great. Thanks for the answer. Thanks.
Now we have a question from Giulia Urso.
Can you hear me?
I can. Yes, I can hear you. I don't know. Fabrizio, can you hear Giulia?
I have a problem with my mic, so
yes,
I just want to make sure you can hear me. So Fabrizio, hi. First of all, a very, very interesting topic. Actually, I have two questions. So first of all, I was very intrigued by your very brief mention about the New Deal and the fact that it was a plan which was made up of the three ingredients you were mentioning, you were discussing, but you didn't spoil anything more. So first of all, I would like you to elaborate more on that and just tell us which were the conditions which made it possible, first of all, but in particular, what should we have learned from that could be applied in these times in Europe, for instance. And the second question is related to a topic that I'm really interested to, which is the one of voice, or better, the chance to express voice, because both in practice, let's say, but also in research, when doing research, I found that sometimes, even if or even when they are given voice to express their needs, actually people don't do it. I remember some focus groups, for instance, or let's say public debates, almost empty when discussing, for instance, development policies or any interesting topics. So actually it is very difficult to make people participate, and strategic participation is very difficult in practice. I'm not only talking of citizens, but also, for instance, of rural, let's say, or peripheral, if you want to say so, policymakers. So that's a sort of inertia. So probably, as you were saying, they are discouraged, or probably they are more used to express or to use exit strategy rather than voice. So my question is also based on your experience as, let's say, policymaker, how can we break this inertia in the short run and facilitate a heated or plural debate? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for both. Thanks for the chance to share with you a couple of reflection on the New Deal, and then a very difficult second question. The New Deal. The New Deal explains why I never use too lightly and as a derogatory word the word populism. Populism has acquired a derogatory sense, meaning authoritarian populism, believer in a leader and trusting a leader, acclamation. But that's not what populism was in the US before the crisis, actually, because it started before the crisis as an opposition against the concentration of plutocrats of power in the end of the Morgan family and the other 10 barons family that had led capitalism for many years, using mafia, killing each other, using all the tools that capitalists use when they are unleashed and democracy is not there. And then the populist movement came about, as you know, that changed the image of the country forever, or at least up to 4 years ago. Maybe something else is changing it now. And populism so came about in that rough way in which it does. Why? Because people were not felt represented by existing parties, none of the parties. And the Democrat Party that wasn't as old as the Republican Party as well. And then what happened? Two things happened. That persisting pressure coming, it took years. Huh? It wasn't, we know that. We are in the middle of a process of change that might take time. I know we always feel we don't have time because the climate is impinging on us, because God knows what other pandemic is coming about, but these changes do need time. But through time, that had two impacts. An impact on the Democratic Party, on the technocrats, it brought about within the existing party a new leadership. That certainly was helped by the fact that in Little Cambridge there was an economist that happened to have read another Hungarian economist called Kalecki, and Keynes had read lots of mathematics and economics, and he was a people investing in finance. He had a broad, and it certainly shaped some of the ideas, but the ideas came about within a political movement, so it influenced a party. And then he had an impact in parliament. Democracies need at some point to give power to parliaments. And I would like to remember, as I'm an Italian, many of you are, the pride that I feel in being asked about this question. I can say one of the most important moments in history was by Pecora, coming from an Italian family, second generation Italian family, an MP of the Democratic Party, that summoned JP Morgan onto the parliamentary seat. And do Google JP Morgan Pecora Commission, because you do have some bits of it, and you see the questioning, the toughness of the questioning that made clear that it wasn't just about people in the streets, but people in the streets had found their representatives in parliament. What does it teach to us? I would not elaborate that however much we can mobilize as civic organizations, as researchers, as much as we can do as a forum, as ASVIS, as Rete dei Numeri Pari, as Alleanza per la Povertà, and many other alliances that are coming about all over Europe, at some point that needs to produce an impact on a political party with a renewal of leadership. The old guys can't change their mind. And it needs to then recuperate the role of parliaments and parliamentary democracy. I do believe in deliberative democracy, but parliamentary democracy is what guarantees us that nobody is taking power with no guarantees. Which brings me to deliberative democracy. Oh, well, that's not an easy thing, huh? People end up laying back on the chair, coming to the first meeting and then not coming to the second. And then who comes to the second? The good old guard, the territory of the rural area or the urban area. It's what do we need to do that? Well, we need 2 or 3 ingredients. Of course, if there is a lot of mobilization, if there are strong civic organization in that particular territory that suddenly see the municipality, the mayor or the region and the state moving in and giving them a role, they jump on the wagon and they take the lead. Or sometimes, as you know, because you do this job, because you evaluate and assess, you know, somewhere it happens, somewhere it doesn't happen. It might be a teacher in a school or a director of a school. A leader. We do need leaders. Yes, we do need movements, even at local level, do need leadership, which is what good old Alinsky has taught us so many years ago in community organizing. Forget about that you don't need leadership. So we need leadership expressed by civil society. Okay, one. Second, it helps if you do have a policy design to give a chance to people to speak. If you interpret partnership, the partnership principle of the European Union as inviting people, sort of submerging people with enormous amount of documents 2 days before a meeting without giving access to the web, well, you're killing it, but you do it on purpose. We know that. Huh? So it does help if the state creates a fora for discussion. And then finally, let me say, you can help. Sort of the more these people at local level are accompanied by technical assistant provided by, I don't want to name badly anybody, but some big organization that sort of grab the commission and the role of technical assistants, sub-appalting it, sub-transferring to people very badly paid that we go nowhere, okay? We maybe will enact, they will not do the game, but the more we have university within the third mission, as we do claim is one of our proposal we are discussing with the Minister of Education at this very moment, because we were given a chance to participate as forum together with rector of 10 universities in Italy in a group formally created by the current minister, the previous minister, and carried on by the current minister as advising. The more this mission of accompanying and transferring knowledge at local level is done, the more they will feel, I mean the people that might say, why should I participate? It will not last. It's a fire that will last a meeting. The more they will feel encouraged and supported, and the more it will happen, i.e. strengthening the technocratic structure and linking this structure to universities. It's a third thing that can help. There is no magic solution, Giulia, and you know that more than I, because you know so much and you've done so much in this area.
Okay, now we have a question from Alessandro Crociata.
Hi Fabrizio, thanks. Well, my question is quite similar to the one that Valeria Pica wrote just 5 minutes ago. So I'll try to collapse the two, to synthesize the two questions that are very, very similar. So you provided a definition of social and environmental justice, for instance, by quoting the capability approach of Lassen. So what I learned from your talk is that such a definition is people-centered and in the same time policy-driven. So as for the people-centered part of such approach, such definition, the issue of empowerment of people, for me, it's crucial within the scenario you talked about. So for you, what is the role of culture capital, if we mean it in terms of the accumulation of cultural experiences, such as reading book, attending theater? So what is the role of cultural capital in the definition and of social and environmental justice? And then again, UNESCO defines culture as a driver and enabler of social cohesion, and in promoting cultural diversity and in fostering social inclusion and equity. But as Valeria asked, in the rhetoric of inequalities, does culture usually play an ancillary position? Moreover, in the COVID-19 recovery plan, EU provides measures to fight the crisis in the fields of healthcare, research, economy, and so on, but culture is not mentioned. So we know that one of the sectors that's deeply affected by the pandemic and the lockdown was indeed the creative and cultural industry. So here there are double issues: the lack of awareness of the importance of culture in social cohesion processes, and on the other hand, the loss of workforce, skills, and professional CCIs. Thanks.
Thank you very much. The role we should assign, that you quite rightly assign, that I do assign to culture, was the reason why I mentioned among the opportunities open, and you have added unused until now, the opportunities opened up by COVID to develop, to innovate culture, which has not been captured, for example, by our broadcasting, public broadcasting. Italian RAI is one of the two most important broadcasting corporations, belong to the state. It wasn't given any mission during the crisis. It could have played an amazing role. I can mention, and you probably can mention to me, at least 3 things they could have done they haven't done during the crisis to play a role. There was no role. Even the BBC, that is so engrossed with power when it comes to wars, did play an interesting role during the cultural role during the crisis. So yes, it can play a very important role, not ancillary. It was certainly it was important, that I would want to add, that the Ministry of Culture recognized for the first time within the autonomy sector the role, but it did it in a defensive way by recognizing the importance to subsidize the people who had lost their jobs, and accepting a very low level of weeks of work of people working in the cultural sector. 7 weeks out of 7 days. 7 days was enough, which is not the way to deal with culture, but it was certainly helpful. But it's quite unjust. So you are recognized that most of the people working in the cultural sector are irregular workers, because if you accept that you recognize as deserving a transfer a person that has done 7 days last year, what about people working in the building sector? What could they say? Why don't you recognize me if I've done 7 days? So it was a good move. I'm happy it was done. It helped people surviving, but it shows that we're not there. Okay, so, and I do think that culture plays a very important role within the Amartya Sen based, not just on capability, but on his idea of public debate. By the way, the word that I was forgetting before was reasonable. Somebody wants to know what's the difference between rational and reasonable. I'm here to be able to answer. But what is important in the place-based approach is that it's people-centered, it's policy-driven, but it's also community-oriented. And that's very delicate. Sorry, Alessandro, if I elaborate, I spend 1 more minute on that. But that's very important. What do I mean by is that communitarianism? Not, it is not. It's what Kwame Appiah, a fantastic philosopher from Africa, calls partial cosmopolitanism, which is a mix of us recognizing that every other human being is as relevant as we are, and that its culture, its contribution, even some of its ideas that we believe to be wrong, even concerning delicate things like gender or relation between women and men, have to be taken into account. That's culture. That's a cultural upbringing. But at the same time, recognize loyalty within community. That's a beautiful concept of partial communitarianism, or partial cosmopolitanism, or if you want, I prefer to call it open communitarianism. So within this community, there is a double culture. It comes from within and outside, and from outside. It comes from outside under the form of being challenged all the time by different ideas, by different ways of expressing, of manifesting, of different images, different signification of word, different way of representing feelings, what art is, for example, but also within valorizing what, particularly in a country like Italy, but Austria, but areas of Germany, some areas of France, and many areas of UK, where there is a very differentiated cultural capital, as you like to call it, in the game. I finish on an example because I like to be practical. One of our organizations, just to show how deep it is engrossed, this idea of the role of culture, one of our organizations that deals with something which is really extreme, which is the Cooperativa Daedalus of Naples, that deals with extreme marginality and exploited mostly Black and Nigerian women in the area of prostitution. And kids in marginal area, it's mixing culture, representation, art into and is dedicating some of their resources in that, because it does allow people to interact among each other, to express themselves in a way that no other thing can do. So it will be interesting for you maybe even to be in contact with them, but it shows how right you are in pursuing this line of thinking.
Thank you, Fabrizio. Valeria, although Alessandro summarized your question as well, do you have anything to add, or are you okay and I pass to the next question?
Yes, I would just like to add one thing, that probably now in the definition of a community-based approach, we can also look at the Faro Convention that has been just ratified by the Italian government, and this is an added tool that we can use to define culture and communities and also social cohesion and social and cultural diversity. So besides actually the information and the indication in the EU recovery plan, probably also looking at the other documents that the Council of Europe as well as other international institutions have provided in the past years. The Faro Convention could be really one of the most interesting for us in this period. Thank you.
Thank you, Valeria, for this suggestion. If you so kind to put it on a link in the web, I'm not I'm not omniscient. I'm not aware of it. It sounds a very interesting suggestion. I'll share it with people of the forum. Be happy to have the link on the chat.
Thank you. So I'm not sure about the order now of the hands raised. So I'm going as I see them. Fabiano Compagnucci.
Yes, I'm there. Thank you very much, Fabrizio, for sharing your ideas with our community. I have some questions, just a couple of them. Basically, we are currently facing two major crises, we can say, the pandemic crisis and the environmental crisis. Basically, these two crises share some important features. First of all, they are not, even though they are caused by, we can say, the same development model following a given economic model. Basically, they are not macroeconomic in origin, and even though, of course, they have macroeconomic effects. And both of them, the decarbonization and the pandemic crisis, they need for a massive expansion of public spending. So basically, as it happened after the Second World War, we really need not to, how can I say, to redirect, to restore our economies, but to redirect our economies. And I was thinking, for instance, about the importance of the circular economy. So implementing a circular economy model could have a positive effect in the labor markets because it involves both skilled workers then unskilled workers, so both of them. And these positive effects in the labor markets are very important because maybe we can succeed in increasing wages and not less important, the rights of workers. So I would like to know what's your opinion about this, I'm going to say, this process which is ongoing. If there is room in Europe and in Italy for this type of goal, and as citizens, we must be aware to what in order to let this process become a reality.
Thank you. Thank you, Fabiano. The two major crises are even interconnected, as probably the pandemic, certainly the previous pandemic, were the result of improper exploitation of animals, and so there is an interconnectedness, even in, as we well know, in the impact of the pandemic on the people that were suffering problems of the breathing because of pollution. So the risk that you mentioned is exactly a risk. In the paper that I made a link, we call it the risk of just going back. We call it the one of the two terrible scenarios. The other terrible scenario is authoritarianism. We are witnessing it coming every second. We witness it in the word of Boris Johnson, that were nicely answered by the Italian President of the Republic. a misconceived conception of liberty and some of the words of President Trump. So that's a possibility. It's there. It's happening. And the other is what we call normality and progress, i.e. the idea that at most we can go back to what we were. That's why I started with my charts at the beginning. But to move in a different direction, we need, exactly as you said, to connect social justice and environmental justice. All the proposals of the forum, thanks to the nature of the meeting of cultures. We're back to the concept of culture. The forum is a mix of Catholic and other religious cultures with lay cultures, is a mix of liberal cultures with socialist culture, of which I'm an expression, and we look for a common ground, and that helped us. The work with Lega Ambiente, for example, working with Caritas Italiana, it helped us shaping that and coming out with proposals. One of these proposals were presented yesterday. You can find it in our website. Proposals that address the issue of environment by being careful to the vulnerable. I make two examples. One you made, I made another one. Organization of towns, the redesigning of towns that is called in by the crisis. Can move can move in this both direction. A rather more hectic example than my friend Arturo Lanzani likes a lot, which is the coastal areas. Italy has an enormous amount of coastal areas that represent us with an enormous environmental problem, at the same time with a social problem. What have many regions done? They're renovated. I'm going to the practical here, Dan. They renovated their license to use these things for 30 years without any care of whether the people exploiting the coastal area were actually having good labor or exploited labor, and whether they were actually preserving the land that they were in charge for. So that they should be renovated. They should be conditional on social conditions and environmental conditions. Energy. Even the energy adjustments, we don't want to do what France did that caused the Gilets jaunes reaction. If you suddenly make the carbon jumping up, who are you eating? You're hitting the people working in agricultural areas. You need to give them the money and the time to readjust. So you need some of what comes out of a carbon tax. You need to shift to them in order to make the adjustment. This is policy. This is connecting policy. This is what this is what make people understanding, vulnerable people, the majority of people, that is not just Fabiano, Fabrizio's, or Alessandra's, who are sort of people who can afford it, not affluent, but certainly people who can afford to be environmental, that are environmental oriented, but it is in their own interest. If we don't do that, the climate U-turn will not happen.
Right. Okay, so now we have a question from Margherita.
Thanks, Alessandra, and hello to Fabrizio and everyone. I hope you can hear me well, otherwise interrupt me. I have one question on the side of theory and one on the side of policy. The question about the side of theory pertains to the shock economy theory, and so basically to the debate that started, let's say, 20 years ago about the link also between environmental and social justice. Of course, Naomi Klein's framework related more to war-related issues, but I think it speaks a lot even to natural disasters and crises like earthquakes, but also possibly to the consequences of this pandemic. So I wanted to ask you as a first thing if you had the chance to or ever consider this framework relevant to your work, and in order to think about the potential backlashes and consequences of this crisis, like for instance, a further privatization of welfare services, starting from healthcare, instead of fixing also, let's say, the inefficiencies that came with the public, but that could be adjusted just by reinforcing public welfare? So this would be my first question. And the second is kind of related and relates to the idea of the global inheritance, let's say. I find that very fascinating, and I would ask you to develop upon this idea, especially on the side of.
I lost you on the idea. So I lost 3 words.
On the issue of the inheritance, basically of the universal inheritance. Yeah, thank you. And especially as for the side of housing, because you said when you introduced this idea that the idea is to basically try to level up the intergenerational transmission of inequality, as health is passed mostly intergenerationally. And in Italy, but in most of the Mediterranean countries, we could say like housing is the possibly bigger legacy also for cultural reasons in this and that is transmitted generationally. So I was wondering if in this conceptualization of the inheritance, you came to think about a different model of housing, meaning provided that, especially in urban settings, over the 50% of households' budget goes to housing-related expenses. Did you come with an idea about an alternative model of housing that should be pursued and promoted, and to which this kind of inheritance should be attached, or is this a point you haven't had the chance to touch yet? Thanks.
Very clear, very challenging. Okay, the shock story, I think, is a very good story. It has taught us how shocks can be even created sometimes in order to take by surprise. That has been done in history all the time. Think about the shock. The other day I was looking at the documentary. Think about the shock that Yeltsin people, or indirectly they did against Gorbachev. Not that Gorbachev was a god, but certainly that was a shock to a society that was evolving in a pacifical way, and then a shock. But shock economy is a shock by which when there were economic crisis, then you shift it and you have a reason to an alibi for smashing education and other things. Or you can exploit a shock that you haven't provoked. Okay. We have examples like and that was a risk for the pandemic because it gave a chance, and it is giving a chance to authoritarian people to exert authority. When Italy has not, let me say, I'm very critical of what the government is currently seem to be doing on the economic and social side. I'm not critical at all of what it did on health. I think it proved how whatever troubles there were between regions and the state, municipalities not given enough role. Okay, these were problems, but Italy did not fall into the trap that it could have fallen in, having done a lockdown. A lockdown is an amazing chance for authoritarians. And certainly we have been deprived of a chance of manifesting, demonstrating, but we have not that has not been systematically used by the people who have been entrusted with the power. I would like you to pause on that Italy has proved quite well in this sense, and this is not what is happening in the Anglo-Saxon countries, where clearly it is being exploited to cheat people. When Boris Johnson, I come back to it because he's a prime minister of a very important country in the Western world. It's not a joke, and he's telling us that he's interpreting liberty as the possibility of refusing to have an agency. You're not an agent. You should not think about the effect of what you do on other people. So you are an individual person. There is no reciprocity, no mutualism, to the point that liberty that we cannot impose on people wearing a mask. At the same time, is issuing a decree by which people cannot meet in more than 6 people. What is that if not exploiting ideologically the crisis? So she's right, but they found it difficult. Why? Well, because the pandemic is posing such a challenge to the economic system that they have needed to inflate the economy with an enormous amount of money. I don't like that necessarily. This money is not necessarily going in the right direction, but certainly is confusing them in the old. It's not more any longer a matter of cutting. It's a matter of otherwise everything collapses. So I would say that that theory is important, but we have more of a hand at the moment. There is more chance for us. They are confused and they cannot put into place, and we shouldn't magnify their role. So what I don't like of Naomi Klein sometimes is that they sort of it aggrandize their power, which is not so grand. It's not so grand. We are more powerful as people than what sometimes that a wrong interpretation of that approach made us to believe. Inheritance, it has only our proposal. Remember, a universal, unconditional transfer to every person at the age of 18, accompanied by a process of learning how to use it in the previous years. It is only indirectly. We haven't worked through the point that you put on the floor, which is very important. The fact that it is with people owning houses in Italy, what a difference can make for the life of the young people. Yes, but our proposal has a very important indirect effect on housing. Okay, that you might want to think yourself about, and some of the people work on housing, and that's the following: in order to not the transferring, in order to collect the 8 billion euros and to have a good, progressive, and just taxation, we do assume, otherwise there is not enough money to cover the transfer. We assume to do that famous reform of the assessment and evaluation of housing that Italy hasn't done, not by chance, for a long time. What does this mean? That a family that has actually put all this saving to actually have a house that will then leave to his 2 children, a house that it's not worth more than 1 million euros, 500 to one, 500 to the other, they will not pay taxation. But a family that has put together 10 houses, 20 houses, 40 houses that today are not assessed with their own values, they will get a taxation of their bequest up to 50% of it. Okay, that's by the way the top taxation in some Western countries these days. It's not that high, and that will push them to put them on the market before, to be able, or when they're inherited, to pay for the taxation on them. And that will increase the supply. You know very well, because you know more than I about housing, that the reason why prices are so high is a false prices. Prices in the rich areas of towns centers have not fallen, not because they are kept up by demand, but because people who own them don't need to sell them. But if you do need to sell them, the supply increases, and through market you have an effect. But that's the only effect, is indirect. We haven't worked on an issue that you suggest us to work, and we might have to if some of you are willing to help us.
Thank you. Now, as a chair, I just want to ask you a couple of things right at the end, and then I promise we'll let you go. You've been very generous with your time. So there are a lot of things that you said that I agree with. First and foremost, the access to knowledge. You know, I've been studying human capital all my life, basically, well, all my academic life, not when I was 6. And the access to human capital or knowledge to as many as we can, it's probably the one thing that I always mention when they ask me, if you could start somewhere and what would be the first thing you would invest in, that would be it. So totally agree on that. It also rang a bell, the fact that you said that the families are carrying the burden of welfare, especially in Italy. What COVID did, it showed very clearly that the burden of taking care of kids when they're not at school, it falls on grandparents. And the COVID broke this chain very clearly, because it's ironic, right? The one that might be asymptomatic carriers put in contact with the one that are most likely to die from it. So it completely broke this chain. And so, you know, totally agree on that. But there are two things that I wanted to, one is just a question, the other one is something I want to challenge you on, and it goes back to the universal income that also Margherita mentioned. But the first is, you mentioned changing preferences. You did say at this point, well, Alessandra is an economist, and in fact, that was the one thing that I've noticed more than anything else, because I gave talks recently on COVID, and the thing that they ask me most of the time, because I'm a regional economist, is whether the people are going to move towards the peripheral areas or the cities are going to be in a crisis and what's going to happen. And in one of the talk I gave, I exactly used these changing preferences towards essential services, which is exactly what you said. Now, I use this example of health and schools. And I did say, and I want your opinion on whether I was saying something that made sense or not, that although, okay, there were the preferences changed in the short term in kind of an erratic way. So in the US, they bought 747% more of toilet paper. In Italy, we all started making bread and you couldn't find flour and yeast and whatever. But there are some trends that became clear that I think are here to stay in the long term. And one is this attention to healthcare, right? So I'm very happy I live in L'Aquila, but being not in Milan, in a large city, although it's in Lombardy, which was very badly affected, is the idea that here we don't have a lot of places in intensive care. If I were to live in a smaller place in the inner areas where we all know essential services are lacking, I would be even more scared of being there. So I said it might be that this attention, this preference towards essential services like healthcare, but also schools, and I'll tell you in a second why, might be more of a centrifugal force rather than a centripetal, more a centripetal force rather than a centrifugal force, in the sense that you might want to stay close to a city where you do have a large hospital. The same for schools, actually, because although online schools mean that you can live anywhere, what I did notice is that the schools in the peripheries were less equipped for online teaching. And this is just my experience. I'm just one case and I'm not generalizing. But for instance, the school where my son was going in Milan started with online teaching within a week. The school where he goes here in L'Aquila took over 2 months, right? So they didn't have the same equipment. In a sense, my question on this, and then I have another one, but do you think that this focus, this attention towards essential services will act as a centripetal or a centrifugal force if you were to average them out? And then the one thing I want to challenge you is, I totally agree with you on the universal inheritance. I think it's a great idea. I like when you said assisted, in the sense that you want to teach kids 14 years for 3-4 years what to do with that amount of money. I still disagree with the idea of giving them unconditional and at 18 years this amount of money, because I think it's too young. I think the younger you are, the more short-sighted you are, and also the less knowledge you have, the more short-sighted you are on average, So I fear that, first of all, you want to teach teenagers, which is difficult per se. You want to teach all teenagers, which is barely impossible, to do with this, what to do with this money. But also, if teenagers are, pass me this term because I don't want to sound too harsh, I didn't know what to do at 18. At 18 years old, I remember I wanted to study engineering, and it was lasting 1 year longer than economics. My parents said, oh no, you might get married, go and study economics because it's shorter. And I thought 1 year would have made a difference, and I didn't study engineering because of this reason. This shows how bad I was when I was 18, right? So I'm not blaming any I was the same. So don't you think that there is a problem that if you give everybody at 18 this amount of money, this might even increase inequality, in the sense that some young people might use it for very short necessities, while maybe people that have more access to knowledge already at the age of 18 might make a better use of this money and plan their future ahead better. And so you actually, in a sense, increase the gap rather than reducing it. these are my questions.
Thank you, Alessandra. The changing preferences will it be at the end centrifugal or centripetal? The very short answer where we coincide is it will depend on whether we capture it and do the right policies. I.e., there is a potentially centrifugal force that there was that is in our mind, within ourselves. There was a mayor of a little town, 270 inhabitants, above Alba. I met him in Bologna in a seminar, and he had this beautiful picture. He said, we had some amazing, we had feelings of what should really be done during the pandemic. Let's not them escape from our mind. They don't, so they're fragile. These are fragile, the potential changes of preferences. I think of the two you mentioned, I would tend to think that there is even more to, in both cases, what kind of policy? In one case, in a sense, is simpler. Intensive care is, I'm slightly less convinced, because from my experience, people talking, what I read on newspapers, stories, however much I'm, the very person that has been working on in areas and knows how important it is to measure how long it is to go by car to a hospital. We're still talking about small distances, and what we really need is somebody to tell you whether you need to go or not to a hospital. So in a sense, but this is again policy. But if you do feel you're properly assisted at territorial level, that you can interact with people that can advise, then you've got plenty of time. But in a sense, you're right. If you are to believe that there's nobody around, then you want to have somebody. But it's even more important, of course, in the case of school, where not only the failure to digitalize, the tremendous failure to digitalize, enormous responsibility of the last three governments in enacting what we as a government, let me speak as an ex-minister during the Monti government, had launched and Enrico Letta had put into practice. The following governments have completely failed to do what we should have been already for. But as Alessandra pointed out, it's not just a matter of digitalization, which if you don't have it, you can't even even do it. But it's a matter of equipment, of capacity, of the schools, of the teachers. And there is a policy matter. Educazioni, this amazing alliance that is bringing together 500 associations on education, thanks to the work of many of us, including the forum, is pushing for what we call a territorially oriented approach to fighting the educational poverty, which doesn't put all the burden on the schools, but it puts on the burden of the community as a whole to make sure that the discrepancy that Alessandra mentioned will not be there. And if you do believe it's there, you are not going to move. You're going to feel you should want to move, but you will not moving. So I'm right with you with different emphasis on the two sides. Your doubts, that your challenge in the sense in the right sense, we like to be challenged, because good policies come out only out of challenge, and we are putting at risk our proposals every day around Italy. And I would have felt weaker a year and a half ago. I feel stronger now that we have discussed this issue, the very issue that Alessandra's put on the table, with so many young people and with so many young people. We do have actually answers on the video that I really recommend Alessandra to have a look at, by a bunch of 20 young guys that are being asked, what would you do with it? And they are being asked that by other fellow young people. And you can see from the answers that they're telling the truth. They're telling things you might not like and some things you might like. But what they deliver, and what I think you should revise in your thinking, is the short-sightedness. They're not short-sighted. I mean, and it is weird that we can even think these days. I mean, there was a time when people at the age of 14 would start working, even at 12, and would go to war. These days, thank God, we try not to do it, even though sometimes they do. Both go to war and go to work. But the acceleration of education, the acceleration of maturing. I mean, we males lag about 4 years. You female, you know that you become adolescent now, sometimes at 11 or 12. It's not just a matter of your sexual organs; it's a matter of your awareness of where you live. And your very example was, in a sense, I mean, you had your ideas. Your family is a family that would give you advice, and you believed in. And so you, as I was, privileged people that could interact with parents that could give us advice and possibly convince us. But many other people don't have anything to guide them and reverse the order. Imagine that the money is only a way to allow a discussion in society of what to do at the age of 18. So put accompanying as the center. But you know that money is a totem that is important. As Marco Rossidoria puts it, giving 15,000 euros, which is not enormous, but is quite a lot, which is not enormous, but is quite a lot, gives back to the age of 18 a meaning. It becomes a totem. God, I mean, let's close our eyes. We know we have kids. I do. I have also not only kids, but I have grandchildren. And many of us know people who have kids. I mean, can you imagine them discussing from the age of 18, what will they do? Yeah, it will be one of the issues that we'll discuss more about. And if this discussion is not guided, but is steered, is accompanied in a gentle way, then allow become in itself amazing. And in itself will put people on a, we reduce the gap that you fear it might even be widened. Certainly it will be widened if you let some people in a bad area of Naples falling into the hands of some badly guiding people. They could even kill they could worsen their life with 15,000 euros in their hands. Yes, they could. But they would not if they discuss it for 4 years and see and absorb what other people do. So it is a fantastic challenge where the money, imagine, Alessandra, that this thing cost in terms of transfer rate 8 billion euros, 8.2 billion euros, but then it's 800, almost a billion euros in accompanying. So we would be investing more than 10% of the money in actually designing a system by which young people are actually accompanied. So your challenge is important. We should have it in mind, but making them independent. And let me just finish with this image. Sometimes they look as not being short-sighted because they're not given a chance to decide about anything. And when they are challenged and they have a chance of independence, then they grow because they know that you're giving them power. They feel entrusted with power by society that today is not entrusting them with power.
Fabrizio, that is very interesting. And as you can see, you stayed with us the whole 2 hours, and we could keep on going with the discussion, but of course, you know, it's so much of your time and you were so generous with all these discussions. So I just want to thank you for everything, for this great seminar and discussion afterwards. And again, thank you very much. And thank you all for taking part into this seminar, which was indeed very well attended. So we're very pleased of this today. Thank you, Fabrizio. Thank you again.
Thank you.